Can people change? It's a simple enough question, but one whose answers, depending on who you ask, can vary wildly in their positivity or negativity, as people's beliefs regarding the ability of others or even themselves to change are quite diverse, formed from equally distinct belief systems and life experiences. Some might say that we don't really change, we just become more of who we are given the opportunity. Some might suggest that we can only change to a degree, that our personalities are set early in life and we can only deviate from our paths so much. Others still would say that at any moment we can elect to turn our lives around, to choose good where we had so long chosen evil, to act different and thus to be different. Our subject for today's video, Matthew Murdock, also known as the Daredevil, also known as the Devil of Hell's Kitchen, holds fast to that last viewpoint. He believes with every fiber of his being that each and every person, including the career criminals, mobsters, and psychopaths he deals with on a daily basis, deserve the chance to redeem themselves. Not just once, not twice, but every single day until their lives reach their natural conclusion. If that belief is false, if people cannot in fact change their natures, cannot find redemption, if the murderer is completely incapable of repenting of his ways, then Daredevil's one big rule of do not kill is useless and pointless. Worse, it would be harmful and destructive, as giving those hardened criminals an ultimately hopeless chance to turn their lives around will inevitably lead only to more pain and suffering for those who do not deserve it. This is a conflict that anyone who has watched more than 5 minutes of the Netflix show, the only show we will be covering in this video, by the way, is undoubtedly familiar with. Matt deals with the desire and temptation to kill in every single season, and yet he resists time after time. How? Well, to answer that question, we simply need to visit the very first scene of the show, where our protagonist steps into a confessional for the first time in a while. Matt's Catholic faith plays a major role in the show, and though Daredevil is hardly perfect in its accuracy regarding its depiction of Catholicism, it does a much better job than most Hollywood productions, so I give it props for that. What it omits in this scene, however, if only because it cuts away before Matt can get to it, is the act of contrition, the prayer said by the penitent after he is done confessing his sins and before the priest gives absolution, forgiving said sins. There are a number of different forms of that prayer, but it will commonly end with words akin to, "I firmly resolve to sin no more and to avoid whatever leads me to sin," or "to sin no more, to do penance and to amend my life." This is a crucially important line to remember when discussing Matt Murdock's philosophy, because Catholics are allowed and even strongly encouraged to confess habitual sins, ones that we have committed hundreds or thousands of times, one that we likely commit on a daily basis, and yet ones which we hope we can be rid of and which we will work tirelessly to exterminate. I've said the word hope a few times now, and I'd like to clarify what I mean. Hope is not mere optimism or wishful thinking. In the case of a Catholic like Matt Murdock, hope is a theological virtue, a steadfast trust that God will shape him into the man he needs to be, and will act in like manner in the lives of others if only they let him. That same hope is what Matt would, if the scene didn't cut away, express at the end of his confession, and this is why he refuses to kill. Because he would not take away from another person the opportunity that he is given every time he enters the confessional, which, as we see in the show, is fairly often.
Bless me, Father, for I've sinned. It's been 3 days since my last confession.
Okay, technically that's from Defenders, but that's essentially season 2.5 of Daredevil, so we'll count it. Anyway, Matt's one big rule receives a lot of attention, and rightfully so. There's a reason that I led with it, but its prominence can cause some of Daredevil's other notable attributes to be overlooked. And if you haven't noticed yet, I greatly enjoy doing deep dives into the less obvious and yet hugely impactful traits that make our heroes our heroes. So, to that end, let us begin such a discussion of what makes Matt, and why this character has found his way into the hearts of so many. Again, we return to the opening scene of the show, where some of the first words out of our protagonist's mouth are about how he admired his father's toughness and resilience.
Lost more than he won, but he could take a punch.
Matt's relationship with his father is hugely important for his character throughout the whole show. He doesn't always feel respect and admiration for Battling Jack.
It was hers. You both lied. You both left.
But Well, Matt is a rather conflicted and emotional guy, and the level of charity he feels towards others tends to be somewhat dependent on his mindset at any given time. As a whole, however, it's clear that he believes his dad's influence to be a positive one, and he certainly has taken to heart his father's example when it comes to bouncing back after getting hit.
It ain't how you hit the mat.
It's how you get up.
That's right.
That he can take an unbelievable amount of punishment without one damn complaint.
The last part's the Catholicism.
Now, resilience is obviously an admirable quality. Who doesn't love an underdog who refuses to stay down despite being quite literally punched in the face time after time, night after night? I hardly need to elucidate the value found in this trait. It's quite apparent how being resilient is valuable, and is in fact quite necessary for someone like Daredevil. Because let's face it, when he starts out, Matt kinda sucks at the whole vigilante business. He's going after street-level thugs depending to know the name of the guy on top.
Who do you work for?
I don't know.
I want a name.
There isn't one.
He's beating up corrupt cops demanding information, any information, with hardly a clue as to what he's actually looking for.
You don't know? You really are one stupid son of a bitch, aren't you?
And of course, he's walking right into obvious traps and getting his ass handed to him so bad that he ends up half dead in a dumpster. But he gets stitched up and goes back out there because he believes in what he is doing. That level of resilience, exceptional though it may be, is only the obvious piece of Matt Murdock's ability to get back up after getting hit. Recovering from physical wounds is one thing. Those naturally heal over time, and most will leave no mark at all. This is true for any of us. Unless you suffer a truly traumatic injury or illness, typically even the worst pains will only leave behind a small scar. If Daredevil's resilience could be summed up simply in his ability to endure pain, then he would be no more heroic than the billions of women who have ever given birth. Not that doing so isn't impressive or heroic. My wife has proven to me 4 times over that she is far tougher than I will ever be. Instead, Matt Murdock's truly admirable resilience can be found in his ability to move on from the wounds that are psychological and intangible, harm inflicted on mind, heart, and soul. Unlike most physical wounds, ones that afflict the human spirit tend to stay with us, to haunt us for as long as we let them. And while Matt certainly isn't perfect in his ability to let go of the past, there are numerous moments where he espouses a bit of wisdom which rings so true that it can be found in any number of great stories. For example, in the first season finale, after Nelson and Murdock have had their falling out due to Foggy's discovery of Matt's repeated deceptions, Foggy bemoans their loss and expresses his desire to return to how things used to be. In response, Matt simply says this:
Maybe we can find a way to move forward, Foggy.
If it sounds like you've heard that sentiment expressed on this channel before, well, that's because you have. As I just said, that particular piece of wisdom is endemic within the arena of stories that really matter.
Can't change what's done. Can only move on.
Don't you know what I've done? Yes! But what will you do now?
All we have to decide is what to do with the time that is given to us.
And one reason that I continue to talk about and reflect on this theme is because it's a lesson that I am still learning. I imagine I'm not alone in that. Looking back on our past mistakes and wishing we could change them, that we could redo our choices with our current knowledge and wisdom in hand, is perhaps one of the most popular human pastimes.
If God allowed that, there'd be no future. Just people endlessly rewriting the past.
I think one reason that we are so obsessed with our pasts is because it's easy for us to see the meaning in our choices there, because we can clearly see the consequences of making that choice. If I'd just done X instead of Y, A would have happened instead of B. However, us humans are blessedly not cursed with foresight. Determining every real or potential consequence of our actions is impossible. So instead, we must act according to our principles. When Matt is most tempted to kill, it is because he foresees, or rather, he believes he foresees, evil resulting from his choice to not kill that person who, let's face it, is usually Wilson Fisk. His internal conflict is representative of a clash of philosophies, utilitarianism versus moral absolutism. Daredevil's utilitarian side would have him believe that he can more or less accurately predict the repercussions of his decisions, and then choose the course of action that will result in the least pain and the most happiness across the board for all of Hell's Kitchen. But Matt's true beliefs state absolutely in no uncertain terms that the choice between life and death is not his to make, that it is not for him to know what good or bad may ultimately come of his choices, and thus that he must continue to act due to his convictions. Matt Murdock is obviously a highly principled person. The show makes that quite explicitly clear in the opening episodes when Foggy and Matt voice their disagreements over potential clientele.
I believe we're here to defend the innocent.
And I believe the innocent includes everyone not yet convicted of a crime.
Or there's the fact that Matt dragged Foggy kicking and screaming away from a highly lucrative career at Big Bad Law Firm Incorporated so that they could fight for the little guy in Hell's Kitchen.
You as my partner, there's no telling when I'll be able to afford a real meal again.
If there is one thing that Matt Murdock is not, it is apathetic. The man cares truly and deeply about his principles, his city, and his friends. That latter attachment is one that he struggles with greatly over the course of the show, and which we will examine more in depth later in this video, but for now it's worth mentioning Stick's exhortation when he reappears in Matt's life.
Relationships are a luxury men like you and me can't afford.
That would be forced apathy, refusing to care about someone, rejecting the love you might share because it would distract you from the oh so important mission. But what value does the mission have if you are not fighting for people you love? Love cannot merely be a remote, essentially theoretical care for the well-being of someone else, whom you will not allow to care for you in return. That mindset reduces people to mere assets that need to be protected, and Matt's faith demands that he view and treat others as having infinite and eternal worth. As a future pope would once write in one of the most powerful books on philosophy ever written, the person is a good toward which the only proper and adequate attitude is love. That is, one must will the true good of every person in one's life, which is so much more than mere survival. Again, we will come back to that topic more in depth later, but I had to discuss it here to some extent because that attitude is an essential building block of Matt Murdock's often challenged moral conviction, a trait which makes him stand out among his fellow superheroes. Not that vigilantes or caped crusaders don't struggle with questions of morality. I can easily think of one in particular who shares Matt's one big rule, and thus central internal conflict as well. But few other comic book stories, at least that I have seen, manage to display that struggle, to examine its facets and nuances in the way that Netflix Daredevil does. So, to that end, let us discuss the times that Matt intends to break his one rule, how those moments shape his character, and why they matter. We begin with the first of not a few times that Matt is feeling the itch to send good old Wilson Fisk off to a permanent and early retirement. At this point in the story, Fisk's escapades have been, well, relatively small. Oh, he's committed a few atrocities that Matt has discovered, including nearly getting Karen killed twice, bribing and corrupting who knows how many cops, and dramatically blowing up the Russian mob so he could take over their distribution network, but really, he's just getting started. Which is, of course, what Matt is worried about. Fisk so far seems to be untouchable on the legal front, as he basically only exists as of a day or two ago, and Big Baldy has proven to be a decidedly tough opponent when it comes to manipulating media spin. With the odds of incarcerating or discrediting Fisk looking dismally low, Matt turns his mind to murder and visits Vanessa, allegedly to gain some insight into her beau's mind. Know your enemy, after all. What he finds, however, as he later tells Father Lantom, is that Fisk is in fact human. He has someone who loves him.
We'd mourn his loss.
This is one of those times where I wish I could just let the whole scene play out, because the conversation between Matt and his priest is excellent, and I'd like you to get the full context of every line. Unfortunately, that's just not how the copyright system works here on YouTube. This is why I prefer examining video game characters. Practically that entire industry has collectively decided they're chill with people using any and all of their footage online. So look forward to that in the next character analysis video. Anyway, there are a couple of other lines from this conversation that demand attention. First, Father Lantom asks Matt if he is struggling because he has to kill Fisk and doesn't want to.
Or that you don't have to kill him, but want to.
As I said near the beginning, hope is a notable and powerful theme that pervades this story. If Matt has decided that the only way forward is to kill Fisk, then he has given up hope that all other methods will work, including those which his friends and colleagues are pursuing right that very second. Does Matt have faith in Foggy, Karen, and Ben? Does he trust the public to believe the truth about Fisk if they can get it out there? Does he dare to hope in the integrity of the justice system, despite knowing firsthand how Fisk can manipulate it? The four of them have barely begun their battle against Fisk. Again, they only really just found out who he is. And yet Matt is on the verge of throwing in the towel and resorting to murder. Why? Because it's simple. It's easy. It would, he believes, make all their problems go away in an instant. One of the many issues with believing the ends justify the means is that we can never quite be certain that the means will in fact lead to our desired end. Will killing Wilson Fisk put a stop to violence in their neighborhood? Will it bring about a golden age of safety and prosperity in Hell's Kitchen? Will it ensure Matt's loved ones will never face danger ever again? I can hardly imagine that even Matt Murdock, if pressed, would confidently answer affirmatively to all three of those questions. And as we see in Season 2, of course removing Fisk from the streets of New York did not immediately turn their slice of the Big Apple into a veritable paradise. Okay, so choosing the lethal option would be a failure of foresight, of assuming he actually could foresee the results of his actions. But as I said a moment ago, it would also be the easy and convenient one. And Matt Murdock, being a Catholic, should know what the Gospel of Matthew says about easy paths. Enter through the narrow gate, for the gate is wide and the road broad that leads to destruction, and those who enter through it are many. Even for those who aren't Christian, I imagine this sentiment still rings true. Doing what is right, what is necessary, what is just, is almost always more difficult than the unjust and self-indulgent alternative. Caring about others, loving them, placing their well-being above that of our own is undoubtedly noble, but it is far, far easier to simply retreat into ourselves and look out only for our alleged number one. But the real reason, of course, that Matt should opt against assassinating Fisk is, well, because murder is wrong. Duh. But there's another layer, an added weight, now that Matt has become a defender and protector of Hell's Kitchen, someone who supposedly stands for justice in the face of so much crime and corruption. During their conversation, Father Lantom quotes Proverbs 25. Like a muddied spring or a polluted fountain is the righteous man who gives way before the wicked.
When the righteous succumb to sin, it is as harmful as if the public well were poisoned.
If Matt were to murder Fisk, his sin would not simply remain with him. Our flaws and faults tend not to only affect us in general. They have a way of spreading to our family, our friends, and most especially those who respect us, who look up to and admire us.
But one person is not just one person.
And in the case of Daredevil, those people would number in the thousands. It's not possible for Matt to know exactly what negative repercussions would resound throughout his community should their hero show himself to be a cold-blooded killer, but he can be fairly certain that such an example would hardly have a positive impact on the citizens who believe in him, which is why Matt opts not to try to kill Fisk until he does. Yes, Daredevil does in fact try to kill Wilson Fisk. I feel like this doesn't get talked about enough, probably because he fails, which is important, at least for our hero's psychological well-being, but the point needs to be made. Matthew Murdock commits attempted murder. Why? Why does Matt suddenly make an about-face and decide he doesn't care how much he muddies that spring? Simple. Fisk kills, or more specifically, orders the killing of someone with whom Matt had worked, a woman his friends and he had come to know and respect, who was just trying to keep her home, even as Wilson and his cronies attempted to force her out of it. For that small act of rebellion, she was murdered, causing Matt to decide enough is enough, Fisk needs to go. Now, there are two levels to Matt's sin here. First, he goes to the warehouse with murderous intentions, which obviously isn't great. But instead of Fisk, he finds Nobu, fights Nobu, and ends up killing Nobu, though that's not really his fault since Nobu deflected Matt's baton up into the light that caused a spark, which made him go up in flames. Also, Nobu comes back anyway in the next season due to the hand nonsense, so whatever. But then, Daredevil finds himself face to face with a man that he did come here to kill. At this point, Matt could flee the scene, or even fight Wilson in his usual style and step back from the ledge of true attempted murder. His intentions have not yet coalesced into action. That is, until they very much do so when he attempts to stab Fisk with Nobu's blade, only to be foiled by the man's armored suit lining. I don't know how you can call that anything but attempted murder, which ethically is really no different than actual murder. Whether or not Fisk was wearing the armor that would stop the blade, Matt A. decided to take a life,
I'm gonna kill you.
And then B. attempted to take it. He was essentially stopped only by sheer dumb luck. This is a point which the show doesn't really touch on so much, and I wish it would have. Matt does admit his sin to Father Lantom during the course of an ordinary conversation.
No, I didn't kill him. But I tried to.
but then the priest kind of moves on and asks him how his quote-unquote failure affected him. Which does matter, don't get me wrong, consequences are important. They make our actions real, they cause ripple effects, they change how we view ourselves and others. But when it comes to simply acting according to principle, I can't say I see any real difference between pulling the trigger and missing, and pulling the trigger and successfully finding your target. But I've belabored that point enough. Matt does not, in fact, manage to finish off his nemesis, and that is important for several reasons. Most obviously, so the plot can continue rolling since the villain still lives. Second, the fact that Daredevil did not snuff out Wilson Fisk's light, that the big man can still, however unlikely, choose to change his ways and seek redemption, is of immense importance for Matt's mental well-being. As we've talked about already, Matt's belief in that possibility of redemption for everyone is why he doesn't kill. He himself may bear as much moral guilt as if he had killed Fisk, but it isn't compounded by him taking away that chance from Wilson. And third, since Fisk remains alive and well, there is no real need to worry about the fallout that would have resulted should Hell's Kitchen's hero been shown to be a murderer. And to the show's credit, it depicts Matt's struggle with what he has done quite well, even in that same scene where he admits to attempted murder.
Why did he put the devil in me? Why do I feel it in my heart, clawing to be let out?
Matt is essentially hitting on the problem of evil, which is an age-old philosophical and theological question which far better minds than mine have already tackled. But I played that clip because it highlights a fundamental truth about humans. We suck. Yes, every human being is incredible, wonderful, and more valuable than you or I could possibly imagine. But at the same time, we tend to do some really awful stuff. Inside each and every one of us, there exists the capacity to do great evil. Great good too, but so often the urge to do evil is stronger, louder, and far easier to unleash. All we have to do to become worse people is simply let ourselves. Falling into sloth, anger, drunkenness, or your destructive vice of choice is stupidly easy. Our desires that drive us into those sins are primal, urgent, and seemingly unyielding. That is why I don't mind that Matt's struggle with his desire to kill is a reoccurring theme throughout the show. Of course it is. How could it not be? He is constantly battling against men who do not have his same moral conviction, and who will almost certainly not stop being their dastardly selves until they end up 6 feet under the ground. Season 2 bringing in the Punisher was a brilliant decision, as it made Matt stand his ground and defend his philosophy, arguing against Frank's worldview that, if morally abhorrent, is certainly effective.
People don't have to die.
Come on, Red, you believe that?
I believe it's not my call, and it ain't yours either.
Honestly, if you don't mind a little sidebar from our discussion on Matt's morality, the Punisher was just a fantastic character. His monologue in the graveyard? Perfection.
My girl, she's keeping me on my feet.
The way he and Daredevil played off each other was darkly hilarious at times, and the scenes with Frank and Karen were superb. I loved how it brought out Karen's ruthless side. After all, she has killed before. The man she shot was bad, right? Maybe Frank's right. Maybe men like that don't deserve a quote-unquote fair trial. She was justified, wasn't she? Anyway, despite Matt's confident proclamation of his belief in redemption early in Season 2, he gets worn down over the course of this story arc, as tends to happen, and finally figures, you know what, let's go kill this bastard. The bastard in question being Frank's former commanding officer, turned drug lord, the man ultimately responsible for the death of the Castle family, the district attorney, and numerous others, not to mention the guy who almost killed Karen. Again. Just this once, Matt is willing to break his rule. But Frank says that's not how this works.
You cross over to my side of the line. You don't get to come back from that.
In other words, to kill is to become a killer. No doubt taking out the blacksmith would have been effective, at least in the short term, and Matt, getting a taste of such success, wouldn't be able to stop himself from continuing down that road. A road which would ultimately destroy him. I love that Frank is the one to point this out. I've said before that a sign of a good man, or at least a man not wholly corrupt of heart, is that he wants or urges others to be better than he is. While he certainly doesn't consider himself evil, Frank Castle doesn't exactly think himself a good, just, and upright man.
What I do, I just do. It's out of necessity.
But he does recognize the goodness in Matt, and while he may not deeply care about whether or not Matt preserves it, he cares enough to give him the chance to avoid becoming just like the Punisher. But of course, things don't stop there. Wilson Fisk rears his big bald head again, manipulating, bribing, coercing, and blackmailing his way back into a position of power. And this time, it's personal, as evidenced by the copycat Daredevil that Fisk creates. Obviously, there are numerous events which I'm skipping over here in the build-up to this moment, but we've talked enough about Matt's moral conviction that I think we can just cut to the big decision, where Fisk is at the mercy of Daredevil, arms spread wide, accepting death, even asking for it. But Matt refuses.
Kill me! No! God knows I want you, but you don't get to destroy who I am!
Who is Matthew Murdock? He's a Catholic, which means a great many things, but to narrow it down for the sake of this scene, it means that he is someone who believes in the possibility of redemption for everyone, and that it is not his right or duty to cut short anyone's opportunity to seek salvation. Has that changed since the beginning of the show? No. In that aspect of his character, Matt is now as he was at the beginning, but he wavered, he struggled. At times, he even made up his mind to go against his conviction because he was angry, because it would have been easier or more convenient. No matter how much he faltered, however, he always returned to that place. When he failed, when he sinned, he sought to change. He sought redemption. How could he deny others that same chance? That belief, which seems foolish at times, especially considering who Matt is dealing with and the many crimes of the men he refuses to kill, could be called excessively and foolishly optimistic. And if we're talking about surface-level optimism, I would absolutely agree with that assessment. That form of optimism basically says, I think things are going to work out quite pleasantly. And often in life, it is undeniably clear that things are not going to work out pleasantly. To believe otherwise would be irrational and asinine. Basic optimism looks at a situation and dreams up happy endings for that given scenario, but that is not the sort of optimism which Matthew Murdock possesses. His hopeful outlook is not a mere positive mental attitude, but rather is something deeper, rooted in his faith and beliefs about the nature of the world. As a fellow Catholic once put it, no man can estimate what is really happening at the present subspecie aeternitatis. All we do know, and that to a large extent by direct experience, is that evil labors with vast power and perpetual success in vain, preparing always only the soil for unexpected good to sprout in. So it is in general, and so it is in our own lives. Tolkien put this part of his philosophy into The Lord of the Rings and spread it around like butter. Lots of butter, almost too much butter for the bread. But perhaps nowhere does it show up more clearly than when Sam and Frodo are nearing the point of despair, trudging across the plains of Gorgoroth, an impossible climb up Mount Doom still ahead of them. There, peeping among the cloud rack above a dark tor high up in the mountains, Sam saw a white star twinkle for a while. The beauty of it smote his heart as he looked up out of the forsaken land, and hope returned to him. For like a shaft, clear and cold, the thought pierced him that in the end, the shadow was only a small and passing thing. There was light and high beauty forever beyond its reach. This kind of deeply rooted optimism is not easily observed in the words of a character. Matt does express his surface-level optimism on multiple occasions, which, while not a truly noble trait in and of itself, does at least hint at his more foundational hope.
Everything's gonna work out. I promise. We'll manage. I don't know how, but I know we will.
You certainly don't have to be a Pollyanna if you hold on to that faith-based optimism. Goodness knows Tolkien wasn't. But sometimes the deeper hope can't help but bleed into the small moments where things seem hopeless and you feel helpless, reassuring you, helping you reassure others, setting your mind at ease and steeling you for action. This begs the question, what happens when we lose that hope? Well, dear viewer, fear not. The show does in fact ask that very same question. I am, of course, referring to the beginning of Season 3, which begins shortly after Matt has a building dropped on his head, and he yada-yadas his way out from under hundreds of tons of earth, steel, and concrete, and back to the land of the living. To be clear, the skyscraper collapsing on top of him is not what sends him spiraling, metaphorically anyway, but rather the fact that said building did manage to successfully bury Elektra, his erratic on-again, off-again girlfriend who is largely disliked by most fans of the show. The thing is, though, you're not supposed to like Elektra. She's largely a pretty terrible person, which isn't entirely her fault, really, seeing as she was raised by Stick, of all people. And her snooty attitude is off-putting, especially since we have come to love the incredibly humble and down-to-earth Matthew Murdock, but Matt loves her. Why? 2 reasons. 1, because she is yet another whom he wants to save. Elektra is deeply broken, again, raised by Stick, but Matt, being Matt, he sees the good in her and wants her to choose it. More importantly, he believes she can choose it.
Whatever you've done in the past, Elektra, whoever you've chosen to be, you're free now.
Noble, heroic men want to save others, to protect them, even from themselves. This is especially true when the other is a woman, even more so when there is a pre-existing bond with said woman. Want to make your man feel on top of the world, ladies? Tell him he makes you feel safe. But of course, Matt doesn't just love Elektra because he desires to save the damsel in distress. This damsel, after all, is hardly the helpless princess of many a fairy tale, which is, ironically, why Matt allows himself to love her, because she is the one person with whom he can actually share his life, or rather, both his lives. She knows Matt Murdock and she knows Daredevil, and more importantly, she can keep up with both of them. Matt doesn't have to worry about her being able to handle herself in the world of scheming, violent criminals like he does with the decidedly more innocent and less physically capable Karen and Foggy. Or, well, that's what Matt thought. Because he does in fact lose Elektra, finds her again, and then promptly loses her again. Was the second death really necessary? Defenders is kind of mediocre all around, especially when watched amid the Daredevil seasons, but it at least drove home the point that Matt really does care for Elektra, and his motivation to save her is incredibly powerful. So when he ultimately fails, the despair that he feels at the beginning of the 3rd season does not feel out of place. Once Matt gets back on his feet after being buried alive, he has given up on being him. Matthew Murdock had people he cared about, people who loved him in return, a job that fulfilled him and helped those who could not help themselves, and faith that his work would make his city a better and safer place. Now, as he decides to fully embrace Daredevil as his only identity, he rejects all of that.
I am what I do in the dark now. I bleed only for myself.
In that same scene, Matt briefly recaps the story of Job, though not perfectly accurately, and concludes that
Job was a pussy.
Because he endured the suffering that God allowed Satan to inflict upon him without rebelling against God. This reminded me of Canute from Vinland Saga, who witnessed suffering and death and decided that if God wasn't going to, that he himself would forge paradise on earth. Matt's attitude is a little different, but with the same core reasoning behind it. Why suffer? Why struggle? Why bleed when the fruits of your labor always seem to turn out sour and rotten? You could call this episode of Matt's a crisis of faith or a loss of hope, and it absolutely is both of those things, but recall what we talked about earlier regarding principles versus results. We don't seek good and avoid evil because it will make us happy and whole in this life, because we and others will gain earthly benefits from it. We do it because it is right, because others are looking to us to do what is right. Matt's words, "I bleed only for myself," are not just a rejection of God, they are a denouncement of every person he has ever saved, and especially of those who have fought for him, who have stayed by his side day after day, no matter how hard he tried to push them away. I know I keep alluding to his relationship with Foggy and Karen, and you'd think that after some 30 minutes, I'd have managed to get to it already, but that's not how we do things on the Master Samwise channel. Gotta save the best for last, you know? Anyway, Matt feels that he is truly alone, and as he is in the midst of despair, embraces that loneliness, despite the incredible charity being shown to him by Sister Maggie.
So you can throw your self-pitying bullshit at me all day, Murdock, and I'll still be standing right here.
That, right there, is love. Sister Maggie could walk away, let Matt stew, moan, and sulk. It certainly would be more pleasant for her to do so. I mean, yeah, she does kind of have a maternal obligation to him, but whatever her relationship to Matt, Sister Maggie's love for him, despite his repeated barbs and continuous gripes, is truly admirable. It is in love like hers that we find that deeper optimism, which we discussed earlier. Sister Maggie certainly does not have what we would commonly call an optimistic outlook. She is far too sarcastic for anyone to make that claim. But she does clearly possess a deeper hope. One that says, I don't know how, I don't know when, and I may not even know my role in all this, but I will do what I must and I will trust in God's designs. That is the attitude that Matt needs to be confronted with at this point in his story. I mean, the man quite literally gives up and attempts suicide by criminal only to be saved by a police siren.
God forgive me.
What I appreciate still more about Sister Maggie's character is that she doesn't try to feed Matt platitudes in order to assuage his pain. She doesn't try to predict the future, to tell him everything will be all right, but instead encourages him in her own tough love way to do what he needs to do now.
Give yourself time to heal. Or you're gonna get yourself killed.
But more importantly, she models for him that deeper hope that he needs to regain. A hope that, if it wasn't already clear, he really has lost at the moment. In a later conversation with the sister, Matt states that he doesn't think people really can change.
I think we come into this world who we are. We can't change our fundamental nature.
Sister Maggie, of course, doesn't believe that, and she sticks to her guns even if Matt isn't listening. That is one other thing that I appreciated about her and Father Lantom. They don't really argue with Matt, they simply present the truth. They see maintaining a relationship with him as far more important than winning an argument. For one thing, they probably couldn't win an argument against a Columbia-trained lawyer. And for another, because the number of souls who have been converted through argumentation is undoubtedly quite minuscule. The priest and sister are bold and fearless in their faith, but they want to fight for Matt Murdock, not fight with him. Because they have hope, they have genuine optimism given by their faith that he will find his way to where he needs to be. As for Matt's own sense of hope, well, as before, it ebbs and flows throughout the season. When he begins to formulate a plan to take down Wilson Fisk via the inmate who was paid by Fisk to stab Fisk, he has hope in humanity and their ability to end things peacefully. When that witness is killed and Matt himself beaten by the fake Daredevil, Matt says forget that and infiltrates Fisk's penthouse, apparently intent on killing the crime lord, only to opt to leave in order to save Karen. This cycle then repeats itself with Agent Nadim, whose apparently bulletproof testimony gets undermined by a blackmailed grand jury, causing Matt to once again lose faith in the system's ability to put away Fisk and resolves to do so himself permanently. One might be tempted to call this lazy writing, repeating the same emotional arc over and over, but really isn't that what we all do? Again, going back to the show's opening scene, the sins that one confesses are so often sins that one has committed over and over again. Our struggle with vice is a perpetual and seemingly endless one, but victory is possible. And so it is only fitting that Matt finally and ultimately rejects the temptation that has plagued him throughout his story. With everything to gain and nothing to lose save for his soul, Matt chooses to hope. He may not believe or expect that Wilson Fisk will ever change, but he has a deeper and truer hope founded not in mere optimism, but in faith. Now, in order to fully understand why Matt's temptation to kill was so strong and thus why his final victory over it is so profound, we need to finally discuss his love for his friends. The relationship between Matt, Foggy, and Karen is quite simply wonderful. There are far too few friendships, too few examples of genuine philia depicted on television these days, and these three have one of the best I've seen in recent years. Of course, things are hardly always sunshine and roses. Even in the early days of the show, before Foggy discovers Matt's secret and their friendship goes down the tubes for a bit, Matt isn't always an ideal friend. His powerful moral conviction is certainly praiseworthy, but it, combined with the knowledge he gains in secret through his abilities, causes him to steamroll his friends and colleagues on more than one occasion.
Well, it was lovely to meet you, Miss Page. We have a full caseload right now, so...
We'd be happy to represent you, Mr. Huey.
What?
Here's where I'd like to praise Foggy Nelson a bit. It can't be easy being friends with Matthew Murdock, even before he realizes his friend is also a vigilante, due to Matt's aforementioned overruling of Foggy's judgment on multiple occasions. But Foggy sticks with him. Why? Because he trusts Matt. He believes in him. Matt does, after all, serve as something of a moral compass for Foggy. Mr. Murdock calls on his best friend to use his great intellect and extensive legal training for the good of those who cannot defend themselves. Solid friendships require such a dynamic. If we truly love our friends, as we ought, we will push them to be better, and they will do the same for us in whatever way they can. For Matt, Foggy doesn't really begin to be any sort of compass for him until their relationship starts to falter, following the aforementioned discovery of Matt's violent nightlife.
I wouldn't have kept this from you, Matt. Not from you.
Foggy's trust in Matt was as total and complete as you could find in a friendship. He means what he says there, because Foggy understands something that Matt, at this point in the story, does not. The people matter more than the mission. Stick's philosophy of relationships, that is, they are things to be avoided, is one that subverts a proper ordering of priorities and moral goods. The reason that Stick tells Matt to push his friends away at whatever cost to their relationship is so that they cannot be used against him, so that his focus will remain on the all-important war, and so he will not be held back by caring about banal things such as human connection. And Matt, at times, is inclined to agree with that worldview.
I'd have to push the people that I care about away if I wanted to be effective at what I do.
Seems like you listened.
That conversation takes place after Matt tracks the Chinese heroin trade to a warehouse, discovers all the blind employees there, gets his ass kicked by Madame Gao, and then barely manages to get everyone out of there before the burning building collapses on top of them. For the last couple of episodes, he has been going it alone, and to put it mildly, things have not been going very well for him in any area of his life. Before, he had assumed that keeping his masked persona secret would be sufficient to circumvent Stick's advice, to avoid the fallout that his former mentor asserted would be inevitable. When that secrecy failed, Matt reverted to the easiest course, pushing away his loved ones. He knows he cannot quit being Daredevil, and he cannot fathom endangering his friends, so separation appears the only available choice. But he hasn't yet realized that not only was Stick wrong, his advice was completely backwards. If Matt does not maintain genuine, loving relationships, then he is essentially fighting for nothing. Protecting Hell's Kitchen will eventually become nothing more than a remote, theoretical ideal if he does not allow himself to care deeply for some of the inhabitants of that neighborhood. As stories like Band of Brothers will tell you, when it comes down to it, soldiers don't fight and die for their country, principle, or ideas. They fight and die for the men next to them, for those who fight with them. Matt has been fighting his war all by himself, and it wears him down to the point that he is finally forced to admit to his own insufficiency.
I can't do this alone. I can't take another step.
You're not alone. We never were.
It's important to note that Matt doesn't just need allies, mere fellow soldiers in the fight against Fisk. He needs friends. He needs something to ground him, to give his fight meaning. If he does not have Karen and Foggy to fall back on, he will consume himself, disappearing fully into his fight and his alter ego. Which is, of course, what happens in between seasons 2 and 3. The end of season 1 wrapped on a high note for the three friends, and it was truly heartwarming to see them all together again, even though the destructive spat between Foggy and Matt lasted only a couple of episodes.
It's the way it should be.
But even as we witness that happy ending, it is clear that things are not and cannot be perfect. After all, Matt is still harboring his secret, still keeping Daredevil hidden away from Karen, a decision that proves to be a major source of tension and distress in their relationship and his friendship with Foggy during season 2. I won't spend too much time detailing their struggles during this storyline, but the main internal conflict for Matt is his obligation to the city, i.e. being Daredevil, and his duties during the day, and by extension his duties to his friends, whose own success and well-being rely on Matt actually being able to lawyer properly. And Matt very much intends to balance both lives as best he can, while still keeping them somewhat separate.
You know, Karen's been asking questions. The cuts, the scrapes, the bruises.
What do you tell her?
You have a drinking problem.
Before his conversations with Frank convince him, for a little while anyway, to give up the ways of the vigilante in order to prevent becoming Frank.
The Punisher? No. I think he was inevitable.
You know, you're one bad day away from being me.
Vigilante days are done in this town.
And for a brief moment, it appears as if everything might work out after all, as if Matt has actually found peace, self-acceptance, and is embracing what truly matters to him.
Keep going like this, you just might end up happy.
But as is her tendency, Elektra shows up to ruin everything. I mean, kinda? I do rather hate Elektra, but that's kind of the point. She's not a character you're supposed to like, who is just so badly written that you end up hating her. And believe me, I'm all too familiar with such characters. Elektra is generally fairly well written. She just happens to be a terrible influence on our hero and the cause of so many of his problems during the second season. As I've said, I'm a huge fan of Matt, Foggy, and Karen altogether. So when Elektra goes and threatens a key witness in their defense case because she wants to help and ends up screwing everything up, leading to further strife within the friendship.
Stop acting like these things just happened to you!
Well, I can't help but hate her. But despite her clear and obvious attempts to drag him down into the morally depraved muck in which she habitually wallows, Matt cares for Elektra. As we discussed earlier, this is largely due to the fact that he can actually share both of his lives with her. It's an incredibly simple answer to a rather puzzling question. Why would such a morally upright, principled man such as Matt Murdock waste even a second on a scumbag like Elektra, we ask? But it is behind simple answers such as the one I stated earlier that fundamental and crucial truths so often lie. what Matt wants, what we all want in genuine loving relationships, be they romantic or platonic, is to belong, to have the opportunity to give of ourselves without reservation, to hold nothing back, and to know that the person or persons across from you will respond in kind and with equal freedom.
Without this, I'm not alive. I'm not really. And I know that now, thanks to you. I do know that I'm free with you, like with no one else.
Holding part of yourself back, especially a significant and important part, is a recipe for certain disaster in practically any relationship. Love is, after all, supposed to be a gift of self. How can you truly and fully love someone if you hide yourself from them? That is the realization that Matt finally comes to after his romp with Elektra and her death at the hands of the Yakuza. In order to have even a chance at healing his relationship with Karen, he has to finally tell her the full truth.
I'm Daredevil.
Unfortunately, that healing process gets interrupted by the aforementioned building that drops on Matt's head, crushing Elektra in the process, and convincing our hero that the people he loves will only suffer if he remains in their lives.
I had friends. I had a life. I care about people, and I'm choosing to let them believe that I'm gone because I am.
The problem with this attitude, with Stick's whole philosophy that Matt has fully embraced for the time being, is that it treats people as objects. Valuable ones to be protected and preserved, but still just things, rather than living, breathing, loving people. Matt's intentions are certainly noble, but he takes his role as a protector to an extreme.
I can't protect you. Not from Fisk.
Such an attitude destroys the protected one's agency.
I'm not yours to protect.
A relationship where we give ourselves and never allow others to return the favor, even when they desperately want to, is hardly ideal. Daredevil is somewhat unique among the characters that I've discussed so far, because most heroes who have to go through significant development have to learn the opposite lesson. Characters like Wreck-It Ralph have to learn to see the inherent value of others, and learn what it means to act out of self-abdication. Matt Murdock always knew that being a hero wasn't about his own image or pride. He understood the selfless nature of his calling from the very start, but he had to realize that a hero cannot be a solo artist. In reality, no human can be. Man is a communal animal. We cannot properly function unless we are in relationship with each other. Matt was always willing to fight for the city, and by city I do mean the people in it, which are of course what give it any value at all, but he refuses to let the city fight for him. Ultimately, this is a form of self-preservation. In going so far to the extreme of selflessness, Matt has ended up back at selfishness. He rejects his friends in order to lessen the chances of them being targeted, although at this point, Fisk already has his sights squarely set on them, and to lessen the hurt should they, like everyone else who he cared about, end up dead.
I don't think you're trying to protect us. I think you're trying to protect
We don't
yourself.
have time for this.
Again, this failure of his is applicable beyond the bounds of Matt's story. If we relentlessly pursue any given trait, even a noble one, and place it as our highest good, we will so often end up right back at the vice we were trying to avoid. Obviously, that's not to say that the pursuit of virtue is to be shunned, but rather that such a venture must be holistic and must be founded in self-disinterest. Because if I tirelessly practice humility and constantly think about how I am being humble, chances are pretty good that I will eventually pride myself on my so-called virtue of humility. I feel like C.S. Lewis said something about that once. That's a joke. I've just quoted that passage so many times I hardly feel the need to read it out loud again. Anyway, my point is this. Seeking virtue is good, but not at the expense of love. Again, I will refer to C.S. Lewis, who in The Four Loves tells the story of a local matriarch who gave and gave and gave for her family, constantly ensuring there was a hot meal, even when they would have rather eaten cold leftovers, always waiting up to make sure everyone got home safe, even when they would rather she just get some rest and leave them to their peace, and always knitting and sewing clothes for her family, even when they could hardly stand to wear them, but they couldn't bear offending her by refusing to wear the products of her hard work. In insisting on selflessly serving her family in every way imaginable, despite their protest that really it's not necessary, this woman had somehow ended up all the way back at selfishness. Love is not demanding. It does not say, I am giving this to you whether you like it or not. Sit down, shut up, and accept my sacrifice. Love asks, what do you really and truly need from me? Then and only then can it give. So what did Karen and Foggy want and need from Matt? Simple. They wanted him.
I only never needed my friend.
The incredible beauty of friendship is that so often all it desires is simple togetherness. Hearing your friend say, I'm glad that you're here with me.
Here at the end of all things
is a gift whose wonder defies description.
Step 1, we work together.
I touched on this earlier, but I need to reiterate just how great of friends Foggy and Karen are. They are insanely loyal to Matt in all the best ways. When I say loyal, I of course do not mean that they are brown-nosing simpletons, but rather that they are doggedly persistent in their pursuit of what is best for Matt. That means that they do not hesitate to call him out on his bullshit whenever necessary.
This whole thing isn't just your problem anymore.
Did somebody break in?
No one broke in.
And no one beat the crap out of you either, I'm guessing.
But it also means that they stay by his side, or rather that they try their absolute best to do so, if only he would let them. Because they know Matt Murdock to be an incredibly passionate and caring man who will, no matter which suit he wears, fight for those who cannot fight for themselves. Because he has saved them, whether from a prison cell or, getting murdered, or from a life of morally corrupt corporate lawyering. Because they love him. He may not deserve that love, but that's what makes it such a potent and meaningful thing. When asked by Agent Nadim how on earth he manages to hold on to his friends despite his double life, Matt responds simply,
"It's not me. It's them."
I cannot emphasize how important this is. Practically no hero is ever sufficient on his own. Even the ones who become self-actualized, as discussed in my last video, can only do so with the support of others, and reach their fullest potential for the sake of, so they can best serve their friends and loved ones. So it is with Matt Murdock. He cannot be the hero Hell's Kitchen needs if he does not allow the people of his neighborhood to fight alongside him, even if that means they put themselves in harm's way. Because that is a choice that Foggy, Karen, Claire, Ben, and whoever else will make out of love, freely, without reservation or hesitation. If Matt rejects that choice, he places safety and mere survival above love, above what life is supposed to be. So it is only fitting that his story, at least as far as this show is concerned, ends with the three of them together once again. The future may be uncertain, but what is definite is their trust in and reliance upon one another.
I have a crazy idea. I need a new napkin.
There's one question that needs to be answered, however. What ties all this together? Is there a certain virtue that underlies all of Matt Murdock's admirable traits? One that he had to embrace in order to become the hero his neighborhood and friends needed him to be? I obviously wouldn't ask that question if the answer wasn't yes. As Matt says during his eulogy for Father Lantom, the man who was always there no matter how angry or dejected Matt was, who demonstrated the greatest of loves a man can give, and who, like the good thief, asked with his final breath for forgiveness.
Counsel me to transcend my fears, to be brave enough to forgive.
The virtue that is most essential for Matthew Murdock, for the hero called Daredevil, is of course courage. To once again quote C.S. Lewis, "Where courage is not, no other virtue can survive except by accident." And in another work, courage is not simply one of the virtues, but the form of every virtue at the testing point, which means at the highest point of reality. If Matt's virtues, if our virtues are to be true virtues, not merely ones we happen to express when things are going well, then they must be integrated with courage. We must be brave enough to hope and thus to continue fighting even when we cannot see how victory might be achieved, or how a lifelong villain might repent and seek redemption. We must be brave enough to stand back up, no matter how many times we get knocked down, because we never know who might be watching, who might be waiting to be inspired by our resilience and resolve. We must be brave enough to stick to our carefully formed moral convictions because they are right, even when everyone around us is screaming for us to change our ways. We must be brave enough to let our friends love us, even if it might mean pain for both us and them. To quote Mr. Lewis one last time, "To love at all is to be vulnerable. Love anything, and your heart will certainly be wrung and possibly be broken. If you want to make sure of keeping it intact, you must give it to no one, not even to an animal. Wrap it carefully round with little hobbies like, vigilantism and little luxuries. Avoid all entanglements. Lock it up safe in the casket or coffin of your selfishness. But in that casket, safe, dark, motionless, airless, it will change. It will not be broken. It will become unbreakable, impenetrable, irredeemable. The alternative to tragedy, or at least to the risk of tragedy, is damnation. The only place outside heaven where you can be perfectly safe from all the dangers and perturbations of love is hell." You may have noticed by now that this is where practically all of my character analyses end up, but that's not really my choice. It's simply the nature of meaningful stories. When it comes down to it, heroes seek, protect, and fight for love. They certainly falter, goodness knows Matt Murdock does, but if they are true heroes, they will always arrive back at love. Doesn't matter if you're talking about Aragorn, Zuko, Arthur Morgan, Kratos, the commandos of Delta Squad, or freaking BT-7274. Heroes choose love. They choose to place the genuine good and well-being of others ahead of their own. In Daredevil, as it turns out, we find more than one hero. And one of the greatest lessons it can teach us comes through Matt's realization that his friends would love him in a truly heroic way, if only he would let them. We should all hope and pray to make friends such as those, to experience a love such as that.